If you're new to D&D, you might never have heard of the Aasimar, and they happen not to be found in the 5th edition Player's Handbook. Rather, they're introduced later in a supplementary book called Volo's Guide to Monsters. And so, it really is the worst speculation on my part, or perhaps better put, the worst of vain hope, to wish for Aasimar to be included in Baldur's Gate 3. But let's just pretend that there's a decent to high probability that they will be included, because they've been one of the most popular player races in the history of D&D, and for good reason. But what are Aasimar? Simply put, Aasimar are essentially the opposite of tieflings. Whereas tieflings are born of some distant lower planar heritage, Aasimar can ultimately trace their heritage back to the upper planes. In 5th edition, tieflings are typecast as descended from the Nine Hells, and Aasimar from Mount Celestia, but traditionally, both tieflings and Aasimar can have any lower planar or upper planar background respectively. However, you might be asking as to why Aasimar have always been so popular. Is it just because they are angelic, descended from celestial beings, and therefore carry with them the potential for ultimate good? That probably has always been a factor, but the biggest reason at the time of 3rd edition is probably the fact that Aasimar, unlike many other races in past editions, took no penalty to their core stats and only received bonuses, which was just incredibly strong. Even though, at least in 3rd edition D&D, they also had what was called extra effective character level because of that strength, and it took them longer to level up. And of course, Aasimar hype continues in the Pathfinder series, even more so, because there is no such thing as effective character level, and they retain their great bonuses with no drawbacks. But that was back then, of course, and now that we find ourselves in the midst of the most popular D&D edition ever, 5th edition, we should really talk about Aasimar as they exist in 5th edition, and thus potentially in Baldur's Gate 3, even if they're not in the Player's Handbook. In 5th edition, Aasimar are descendants of beings of Mount Celestia, the plane of ultimate law and good, and therefore are generally inclined towards good, though like tieflings their background is not an absolute determinant of moral and ethical inclinations. Of all the races, Aasimar are usually most inclined towards the paladin class, in the traditional role of upholder of law and good, of course. In 5th edition, Aasimar often have a so-called angelic guide, usually a deva that acts so as to provide guidance and advice on walking the path of law and good, and they add flavor to the type of approach any given Aasimar might take as he walks his own path of law and good. These can be summarized as follows: bookish and lecturing, compassionate and hopeful, practical and lighthearted, fierce and vengeful, stern and judgmental, kind and parental. And it's important in this context to remember that these guides offer a very specific perspective, which can sometimes conflict with the complexities of mortal life, and an Aasimar is, at the end of the day, just another mortal adventurer. As far as traits are concerned, Aasimar remain an excellent choice for player characters, and were they to be implemented in Baldur's Gate 3, they would likely retain many of the traits they have in pen and paper, which are as follows: +2 to charisma, standard dark vision, celestial resistance, which grants them resistance to necrotic and radiant damage, healing hands, which allows them to heal a number of hit points equal to the character's level, and light cantrip. Like many races, Aasimar have a number of choices available to them in terms of subrace. These are Protector Aasimar, Scourge Aasimar, and Fallen Aasimar. Protector Aasimar are guardians, and use their powers to, as the name implies, protect others. They receive a +1 to wisdom, in addition to the base Aasimar traits, and an ability called Radiant Soul at 3rd level, which allows them to grow incorporeal wings and fly at a rate of 30 feet, and deal radiant damage to a target with either an attack or spell. This lasts 1 minute, and can be used once per long rest. Scourge Aasimar seek out and destroy evil, driven by powerful urges. They're often uncompromising and unflinching in what they see as their duty. They gain a +1 to Constitution, and gain the ability at 3rd level called Radiant Consumption, which can be used once per long rest. This ability allows Scourge Aasimar to radiate divine energy, shedding bright light within a 10-foot radius, and dim light out to another 10 feet. And each creature within 10 feet of this aura takes radiant damage equal to half the character level. Fallen Aasimar are just that. Aasimar who have rejected their celestial heritage to pursue a darker path, as not all Aasimar are good, even if their background pushes them and nudges them in that direction. Fallen Aasimar gain a +1 to strength, and can cast Necrotic Shroud at 3rd level for 1 minute, and all creatures within 10 feet of this character must make a charisma saving throw or become frightened until the end of the turn. Additionally, as long as Necrotic Shroud is up, the Aasimar deals extra necrotic damage to a target with any attack or spell, equal to the character's level. This too can be used once per long rest. Now it's probably a long shot that we're going to have Aasimar in Baldur's Gate 3, for the simple reason that the game is going to be massive, There's only so much room for extra material. Aasimar were unfortunately not included in the 5th edition Player's Handbook, and therefore would be likely too much work for Larian to implement, at least upon initial release. But we can still dream. The biggest obstacle is in fact that Baldur's Gate 3 probably has some of the most race-specific reactivity of any RPG ever made, at least from what we can glean in early access. Adding an entirely new race, especially one as reaction-prone as the Aasimar, might be biting off more than they can chew at the moment, but it still could be a possibility. I, for one, would be absolutely thrilled to have Aasimar in the game, but I also realize that it's unlikely given the scale of the project that Larian has undertaken. So what are your thoughts on the Aasimar, as well as other non-player handbook races you'd like to see in Baldur's Gate 3? However unlikely that prospect might be. Let me know in the comment section. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and I will check you out next time. Take care.